Jeff Gadman, Chair of the Lacey Planning Commission, calling the Wednesday, October 9th, 2024 meeting to order. Let it be shown, we've got Elliot, we've got Gail, we've got Daphne and Kirian here in addition to myself. Also, we've got Spencer Zeman joining. So we do have a quorum. I am going to ask Daphne to please read the land acknowledgement.
We, the city of Lacey, are on the ancestral land of the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, including the Nisqually Indian tribe and the Squaxin Island tribe. We acknowledge and remember those tribal people not recognized today who were absorbed or relocated into other tribes for survival. We recognize the ancestors and their descendants who are still here. We recognize and respect the tribal people of the Treaty of Medicine Creek as the traditional stewards of this land since time immemorial and their role today in taking care of the lands in perpetuity. We recognize and have the responsibility to call attention to the histories of dispossession, forced removal, and abridged treaty rights that allowed our nation, state, and city to develop as they have today. We recommend that community members read the Medicine Creek Treaty of 1854.
Thank you. So the first item is approval of the agenda. I'd be looking for a motion.
So moved. I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Awesome. Okay, September 25 minutes. I'm looking for a motion on those.
I move to accept the minutes.
Second.
All right, Daphne and Gail, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. And I want to mention that we have two members joining remotely. Spencer Zeman will not be on camera tonight. He's not feeling well and probably does not want to be seen on camera. Kirian is remote, and as soon as she gets her daughter in the car, she's going to turn her camera off for her participation. Public comment, we have no members of public in the audience, and I don't see anybody signed up. All right, so we're through that. Any commission member reports? We'll start here in the room. Daphne.
I have two things. First, I just wanted to make comment. I saw in the Thurston County Solid Waste News, I thought this was just an amazing idea. This Fix It Fair. Fix It Fair comes to Thurston County. They need volunteers. I would not be a good volunteer. I do not know how to fix a toaster. But it's going to be at the Lacey Makerspace, and they're encouraging people with fix-it skills to bring their skills and maybe their tools if appropriate, and people that need things fixed like small appliances, lamps, jewelry, textile clothing repairs, tool sharpening, bikes, and other things. And I thought this was just an amazing use of the Lacey Makerspace and a great way to keep things out of the landfill and make people feel useful as far as if they have skills for fixing things like toasters and stuff, which I think is amazing, and bicycles and such. I just thought it was really cool, so.
That is really cool. Date and time?
It is Wednesday, November 20th, 2024, from 3 to 6. Oh, it's actually at St. Martin's. Yeah, St. Martin's University campus. Yeah.
Yep. At the Makerspace.
Yeah, and so this was in the LeMay Pacific Disposal Bill, if you got that, but I thought it was really cool.
Nice. Thank you.
So I thought I'd share. And then I just wanted to do an update. I'm on the Parks Improvement Funding Work Group, and I thought it was just really neat. They took us on a tour of not all, but a lot of the city parks. And as we decide, what we're gonna do, what we're gonna recommend for funding, which parks to apply money to and things like that. It was really interesting that it gave us a really good diverse view of parks, even so much as Brooks Park, which is like, you could have driven by 1,000 times and never have seen it.
I know where it's at.
I do now. I had to it's down an alley and, but it's a nice little jewel of grass, in a neighborhood. Rainier Vista, we did Wonderwood Park, Washers Park, Depot Park, which is so cool. We talked about that. Homan Park, the Senior Center, the Woodland Creek Park, Meridian Neighborhood Park, Greg Cuyo, we just drove by. We also did a tour, brief drive-by on the rack. And so I thought it was just a really great way of bringing, we see parks or we're familiar with certain parks that are either in our neighborhood or we've been there, say, taking your kids when they were little to sports or whatever. But that was a great way to help us understand what we're doing and the purpose of it. So just let you know. I love a good road trip out of the city, so.
That's awesome.
That's it for me.
All right, yeah, so for those of you that don't know, Brooks Park is located off College behind the telephone building. It's either US West Building, Quest Building, or Lumen Building. I don't know
I
how
think it's
they.
US Cellular or something now.
Okay.
Something,
All right.
yeah.
Yeah, and it is just a small little community park there. It's pretty cool.
It's just grass with a
Yeah.
couple nice trees and such, but a nice little green space.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Kieran or Spencer, do you have any reports?
Yes, I did. I read recently that the Tumwater City Council adopted a stance of no on Initiative 2117. And I thought, especially based on the discussion that we're hearing tonight, seeing that would end protection of the air and the water, the forest and the farmland, which is really in line with what we're trying to do with the comp plan. I didn't know if this was something that would, if it passed, if it would impact the goals of the city. So I guess this would be, I don't know if it's a question, but if this is something that could impede our ability to achieve the goals that we're setting out as a city to protect our streams and our air and wildlife.
I don't know if the city is actually studying that. Do you know, Aaron?
I do not. Have you heard anything about this one?
Yeah, we can look into it, but I don't know that we have any response to that at this time.
I'll look
Okay.
into it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course.
Thank you, Kieran. Spencer, anything?
No, thank you.
Okay, oh, you sound terrible. All right, any department report tonight?
No, we're good.
Okay, we have no public hearing. We're on a new business. We're gonna go into permit processing requirements.
Yes.
Sarah.
Sure. We'll make it together.
Right, let's see. So I'll start with so what do I need to do? I need to clear full screen, and then do I need to share it too? Or is it shared? Go back to Zoom. You might have to go back. Escape. Here we go. You go back to Zoom. Down. Oh, okay, yeah, and then share the screen. Okay. Oh my gosh. You would think I would
Green
know how to
button.
do this.
Brilliant. Then share at the bottom there.
All right. Let's see, here I can then go like that, right?
There we
go.
go.
Oh my
That's
God.
awesome.
All right, thank you. So, good evening. I'm Sarah Schelling. I'm the current planning and economic development manager for the Community and Economic Development Department. And tonight I'm here to talk to you about some impacts of legislation and some requirements of that same legislation that we have to begin to look at implementing here in the city of Lacey. And specifically, I'm going to talk about not only the city of Lacey, but throughout the state, any growth management planning, city or county in the state. I'm specifically going to talk about Senate Bill 5290, and it actually passed. I have an error in my staff report. I said in 2024, but it actually passed in 2023. And we are required to begin implementing the requirements of that legislation beginning January 1st of 2025. And specifically, we'll get started, give you a little bit of background of the bill. Specifically, what this does is amends the Local Project Review Act. It's RCW 3670B. So this is the Growth Management Act. For those of you who aren't aware, it's the Local Project Review Act portion of the Growth Management Act. And this was originally adopted in 1995 and hasn't been
this part has not been updated since then. But it really addresses how jurisdictions perform local project review. It currently sets a timeline of 120 days for jurisdictions to adopt or to issue final decisions on land use, building permit, civil drawing permit applications. It allows us 120 days to issue final decisions on that. The timeline didn't distinguish between types of permits, complexity of permits, notice requirements. It was just a flat 120-day timeline. Exceeding that timeline didn't have any penalties associated with it. The local government is supposed to, if you exceed that 120 days, we're supposed to write a letter that says we've exceeded that 120 days and essentially, I'm sorry about that, but we still aren't ready to issue a decision on your permit. So in 2023, a group brought before 5290 to the state legislature, which actually does provide and prescribe review timelines and additionally potential monetary penalties if we don't meet review timelines. So we'll go over a little bit about what those timelines are, what those look like. So for projects that don't require public notice, and these are simple land use applications like boundary line adjustments, design review applications. It can include building permits, whether that's a single family home building permit, a multifamily building permit, a big commercial structure building permit, and public works civil construction permit applications as well. So these require no notice. The new legislation requires that final decisions on those permits be issued within 65 days of a determination of completeness. There are some ways within the law that you can stop the clock on that review. If it needs revisions, you write a letter that says I need revisions, you can stop that review clock. So it's not a flat 65 days. But it does put a much shorter time frame than we're used to for issuing those permits. And some of the building permits and civil drawing permits can be really complex when you start digging into those plan sets and trying to get them issued. So that's going to be a big change for our building department and public works department. 100 days for permits with notice requirements. So this is going to be typical land use applications, like a site plan review application that comes in with an environmental checklist. We typically right now in our planning department, we tend to generally issue within 6 to 8 weeks of the time of determination of completeness. So the 100 days doesn't seem like it will likely affect how we issue permits in the city, but we will have to be mindful of how we're handling our clocks. And then 170 days for projects that require public notice and a public hearing. And these are bigger projects like wetland development permits, conditional use permits, and major subdivisions. And these are things that typically have to go to a hearings examiner. And so there are other public notice requirements and statutory requirements built into those processes that this timeline accommodates for. So 170 days actually allows for a little bit extra time for that review than under the RCW 3670B as passed in 1995. There's a few other things, and there's a lot in 5290. A few other things that apply to the city. We do have a new requirement to report how we're doing on our timelines, and we'll have to do that annually to the Department of Commerce. Although the bill isn't in effect, the timelines aren't in effect until January of 2025. We do have to report for 2024 permits in 2025. What this reporting, I think there's some questions about what Commerce is going to do with this information. And I think at this point, it's just a catalog of information. They'll post it to their website. Yep, we post how we're doing on our website. And it's just a way to show how the city is doing in meeting their timelines. And that will be something we have to do every year beginning in 2025. Let's see. So we have a few steps to compliance. I feel like I missed something. I think I missed talking about monetary penalties. Yes. So if we don't meet our timelines for review, there are monetary penalties, and those come in the form of a reimbursement of a portion of the permit fees. 10% in certain situations and up to 20% if the delay continues on. There's some language in the bill that allows for the city to look at some other options. There are, I think, 10 options that the city could adopt. We'd have to adopt 3 of them.
that would help to help mitigate any impacts of the permitting requirements. I think I talked a little bit about that, of not meeting the permitting requirements. It would help, let's see, reduce the, can't think of the word I'm trying to think of, with the monetary penalty. It would help keep the monetary penalty from impacting us if we adopt additional measures to expedite permit review timelines, or expedite permit review. Some of those things are adopting fees, reasonable fees, some means for meeting with applicants during the review process, so that we can resolve any issues and maybe expedite getting issues resolved during that process. And then there are a few more that I think that we'll be looking at as well to try and insulate the city from the impacts of those fees. Obviously, we want to meet timelines and be as timely as possible during our reviews, and the city generally does a pretty good job of that. But the steps to compliance, so we're going to be looking at updating the development guideline standards. We'll go through the draft updates here in just a minute. We'll go through sort of how Tom did with you guys the other day with his development guidelines. And then we'll need to bring it to the Planning Commission for a public hearing on the changes for final adoption, and then a recommendation to council for final adoption, hopefully in December, so that we can meet the January 1st deadline. If we don't meet the January 1st deadline, these timelines will be default, but there will be, and will be subject to them anyway. However, there will be less flexibility for the city to go in and make some amendments to our development procedures after January 1st, 2025. So we really want to get it approved, yeah, the ordinance or the changes adopted by the end of the year. So I'll take you through the chapter 1 of the development guidelines. I know Tom was here a few weeks ago bringing chapters 3 through to introduce you to the updates to the development guidelines. And he talked a little bit about what the plan is for chapter 1 and also chapter 2 of the guidelines. And what I'm bringing you today is a little bit different than I think what he and Ryan talked about. But it's only different in the fact because of timing. I don't think we'd be able to get this moved into ordinance prior to the end of the year. So at this time, we'd like to keep it in the guidelines, chapter 1 in the guidelines and chapter 2 as well. And have the timeline requirements addressed and have it remain in the guidelines. And when Tom brings his final draft forward, we'll also look at pulling chapter 1, chapter 2 out and putting them into the Lacey Municipal Code where I think they belong better in that section. So you'll be seeing this again. There may be some other process changes resulting from some other legislation. We've had a lot of legislation passed that affects how we do business, reviewing permits, and doing zoning in the city over the last couple of years. And so we'll be looking to address some of those items in chapter 1 as well, moving forward. You have a question?
I do. This is mostly in regards to the low income housing as per 3678.
This is not. This is 3670B and it's related to local project review. So I believe it was likely passed as a result. I think part of it was trying to get housing projects reviewed more quickly, but also all building permits reviewed more quickly. I think there was pressure from the building industry for governments to start issuing permits faster.
So that's for SFR as well?
I'm sorry, what?
Single family residence?
This would include any type of permit, any building
Any
permits.
sort of development?
Yes, single family permits, multifamily permits, commercial
So it's
permits.
across the board?
Across the board, yeah.
Because that's not the way I read it on the originally, because it was they kept referring back to 36.708, which was the low income housing.
And 5290?
Yes.
Not familiar with that. Section of it. That might be in terms of reporting, the reporting requirements. I think they want to show through reporting that we're issuing multifamily housing quickly.
Yeah, this is pretty broad. I mean,
Yes, it
it's
is, but
broad.
this
It's not-
section, yes, in terms of the local project review is really related to getting permits out the door, submitted and out the door.
Okay.
Gail?
Yeah, I just have a question, a curiosity question. I go back to the meeting that we had with the county last year and the fact that there were considerable complaints that the county is very slow. in
Yeah.
issuing. Does this apply to the county as well?
It does. Any county or city that's planning under the Growth Management
That
Act.
will be
Yep,
interesting.
Yep, yep.
That was our thought.
Yeah. They are making a lot of changes. They're beginning to address 5290 as well and looking at their processes and procedures as well. So, I mean, it could be quite impactful for a lot of jurisdictions. I think we do a pretty good job.
Yeah, right now, they've got an interim
Yeah.
manager
Yeah,
for, yeah,
yeah.
Daphne.
Just some quick clarity. So I'm assuming these are calendar days, any consideration of holidays, and when does a completed application, is that like, what if somebody left something blank? This, do we restart the clock when they provide a full completed is?
Yep. So the determinate 5290 addresses here, I'm gonna stop sharing this and I'll start sharing
If you're gonna get to that, my apologies.
That's okay. Let's see.
You're jumping ahead.
Yeah.
Well, when she was talking days, I was like, is that calendar days? What about if it's Christmas and Thanksgiving? And
In the internet is my question.
Oh,
Or
really?
on the count, yeah, we can, yeah. What do we
Okay.
have?
Oh, and I've got to share first.
There
All
you
right.
go. You had it.
Oh my gosh.
Right, lower right.
There it is.
And if you're, at some point,
Okay.
how much of a burden is this gonna be for city staff to make these changes, and
Yeah.
compile the necessary data to report? Are we talking a shortfall in staffing, I guess, if you're gonna get to that as well?
I'm not getting to that. I mean, that's certainly one of the things that, that's a concern for sure. What we'll have to do and what we've already started to do, ideally you would have permit tracking software that you can set up. When you receive documents, receive applications, you put in a date. The date is routed to the planner, you can put in the date. When they reviewed it, you can do that. If it's not complete, they would put that date in. We have set up, our system isn't great, but we do have a report that works. So the burden is really gonna be on staff to make sure that we're putting the dates in that we need to, so that we can show how we're actually doing. We'll see how it goes. I think for land use permits and building permits, I think we've got a report down. And I'm not exactly certain how Public Works tracks their civil permit review process, because this does apply to civil permit review as well. So, but I think we'll get there.
Okay, Carrion.
Hi, thank you. I was able to park for a second. But I was really curious when I was reading through this about public notification where the public could give feedback or participate in that process. It said that to have the city in like a place that was accessible, I'd assume that would be the city website. But it also said that it needed to be posted in the official newspaper of the city of Lacey.
Yeah.
But I was really confused about that. I mean, a lot of people don't get the paper, and I don't know if, do we have an official city newspaper?
So the Olympian is the official city newspaper. Some of a lot of what you're referring to is really old. So those are things that were probably adopted when the chapter 1 was originally put together. And I think that is a really good point to bring up. I think that's one of the things that we'll probably address when we come back and move this to ordinance, is get it more up to date with how we actually do notice right now. So including it on the city website and posting it. There's a number of different places by the law where we can post it. And I think that as we start to look at chapter 1 and begin to move it into ordinance in 2025 with some of the other ordinance work that we're gonna do, we'll start looking at updating kind of the outdated parts of this chapter as well.
Yeah, and Carrion, just as a little bit of background. Anytime you read in RCW or ordinance where it talks about publication in newspaper, requirements are always publication in a newspaper of general interest. And so far, the old school media is still that, right? And what governments and the legislature are wrestling with is, you know, yes, most people get their news online anymore, but which formats would be considered general interest? Because it's supposed to be something that is independent, objective, and not be fostering one opinion over the other. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, thank you.
So I've got a question for you. So
Okay.
with regard, so it looks like the public hearing notice buys a little extra time. So my question is, did the state specify what requires public interest or public hearing or public notice, public notice? Or do we specify that?
There are requirements, in in state law that require things that require public notice.
Okay, so that's
There- yeah,
specified.
Yeah, yep.
And that public notice, the comment period is 30 days?
It's usually 14 days. It's a
Okay.
2-week comment period.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you. Sorry
You're welcome.
for temporarily interrupting your
that's okay.
presentation. Go
That's
ahead.
all right. No, it's fine. So now I'll just kind of go through briefly the I did some of the administrative, like little administrative changes. I did make some of those in this, but mostly the changes in this are purely reflective of what's in 5290 and what we have to adopt as a result of that, the law. So the first page, really, I changed, our comprehensive plan is no longer the comprehensive plan for Thurston County Land Use Plan and Lacey Urban Growth Area. It's just the City of Lacey Comprehensive Plan. Let's see. On page 2, we'll delete the definition for application and change that to the project permit application, which it includes some language that excludes things like the adoption or amendment of comprehensive plans, sub-area plans, or development regulations. So those types of project permits are not subject to the requirements of 5290. Let's see. The meat of the changes is really going to be, there's some information or some changes related to that get to your question regarding determination of completeness. And so the determination, it's 28 days from the time they submit the application to the time we have to issue the determination of completeness. And one of the things I think we're really focusing on in terms of internal processes as a department is what we'll take initially as an application. So we're looking at a lot more front-end work with applicants to make sure that what they're submitting meet the requirements of their project. So making sure we don't get caught up in taking applications that don't meet requirements. Yep. Let's see. So let's see. I also changed, we do most of our pre-submission conference meetings virtually. We can do them in person, if desired by the applicant. That's something that we can work on. I did change that. Let's see, just a few other administrative things like a site plan review appointment. And this could be a meeting where an applicant comes in prior to they submit, they bring all their materials with them so that they can go through them with staff, like a pre-submittal meeting. We have a pre-sub conference. This would be different than that, as another step, a pre-application meeting. And then within the 28 days, and it is calendar days, and this is also a change, because it used to be business days, you could exclude holidays. Now it's 28 calendar days from the time that you receive that application that you have to issue your determination of completeness. The other thing 5290 did was it talked a lot about procedural submission requirements. And so what that I think is aiming to do is make sure that applicants really are aware of what they absolutely have to submit in order to have a complete application. And the city needs to be really upfront with what those requirements are. And so that means and they have to be stated on the application form. So that means that we need to, on our application forms, what we'll probably have to do is list every possible
report that they may need, and then work with them with their specific project and tailor that list as we're going through the pre-application review process. Let's see. And this all just deals with that procedural submission requirements. We can't come back if they've submitted and say, oh, hey, wait a second, you also need to have this and that. That would delay the process. And then number 9 is something we added that just allows us to be able to waive certain requirements based on their application type and the project type. Let's see. And then we have to issue a letter in writing, letting them know that their application is complete. And it's got the timeline. Let's see, if we don't issue a complete application within 28 days, on the 29th day, it becomes procedurally complete and we have to review it, and the 28 or the 65, 100 or 170 day clock starts. It starts on the 29th day that we've had the application. Let's see. I actually also included, there was another piece of legislation. It was, I think, House Bill 1105. It was a very short piece of legislation that just says we need to be transparent about when we can provide comment on applications. So our notices have to say, you can provide comments starting this day and ending on this day at 5 o'clock. And so that's what this change addresses. Everything else is really the same here. And then once we start getting into application review is when, so let's see. Or the application review classification is when we start getting into the timelines. So for limited administrative review, again, those are things that don't require public notice, building permits, design review applications, boundary line adjustments. We just stated that we have to issue a decision within 65 days of completeness. I changed the name of our department to the Community and Economic Development Department. I know. Full administrative review, those are the more complex, which require notice. That's 100 days. And then that's just a question that I need to go back and answer. And then the meat of that blue is an error as well, so you can disregard that. The meat of the changes are going to be in the notice of final decision, which details the 65 days, the 100 days, and the 170 days. Talks about how how those days are calculated, and then talks about the things that can be excluded from review. Anytime we've notified the applicant that additional information is needed. So we issue our determination of completeness and begin reviewing the application. That's when we review all the reports and studies to make sure they meet our requirements. If we get into a wetland development or a wetland report and find that it's missing, if it's missing its rating form, we can go back to the applicant and say, hey, this is missing from your application. You need to submit that. That would stop the clock. They submit their materials or their stormwater report didn't meet the requirements. Because when we're reviewing for completeness, we don't review the documents to make sure they meet our requirements. We just have to know that they just have to show that they've submitted them. So it's during the project review that we review to make sure they meet our requirements. So if we need more information or revised information, we write a letter. They get it back to us. We have 14 days to make sure that that information is appropriate. Let's see, administrative appeals, stop the clock. The applicant can stop the clock anytime they want. And then let's see. They can suspend their review as well. The applicant can suspend their review. And then the applicant and the city can agree if we're going to exceed timelines. There's nothing in the chapter that says we can't agree mutually to suspend review or to go a little bit longer on our review as long as the applicant is okay with it. Let's see. And then just a statement that notice of final decision doesn't apply to projects with a legislative review. So thank goodness for Hans, he doesn't have to get the comp plan updated in 170 days. Surprise. And that is the meat of 5290. There's some other information related to appeals. This is all as chapter 1 stands in its current form. Anything that's not in track changes or in red is as it currently stands in chapter 1. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys might have or.
This time we'll start online. Karen or
Okay.
Spencer, any questions? Don't see hands, so I'm gonna assume no.
I had one.
Yeah,
That's okay.
I was starting,
Oh, sorry.
yes.
I thought you-
Yeah, that's okay.
Go with it.
All right,
My apologies.
Elliot.
Part of that statute that keeps the 5290 refers to, it keeps going back to 36708 RCW, which was the low income housing, et cetera. So on that, we have to produce an annual report.
That's the annual report I was talking about.
Okay,
Yep.
and how does this affect that?
So that's part of the requirements that we have to, so we have. It's not, it's part of 5290, but it's not exactly related to, the changes in chapter 1. So we have to report, that's one of the sections of 5290. And it's really designed, the reporting is really designed to show how we are doing on the timelines. So that's what we have to do. That's what we'll have to do in March every year.
So it's not part of that other report that we have to produce?
No,
for the-
it is that report.
It
That
is.
is the report. That's the
Oh.
report, sorry.
Okay. Seemed like two different subjects, though. One is
Right.
for how well we're doing to comply with their low income housing. And then this one is more of how well we comply with
So it's
speed
one
with which we
report.
do it.
It's one report and we're just reporting on how we're issuing building permits or how we're issuing our permits, including the low income housing permits.
I see.
So it really is to show how we're achieving the requirements to get permits issued, including those for housing.
And under that, they gave us grants to,
So we didn't get it, we didn't go for any of the grants to, so the grants were to look to, for electronic permitting, to look at electronic permitting systems. And I can't remember what the other ones were.
for statewide as well.
Yes, yep, and we didn't elect to try and get any of those grants to help us
That was-
implement this.
If it was required,
No.
it wasn't, okay.
Gail?
So Commerce probably had to come up with some grants. That might, so there's different requirements for the jurisdictions and then for the Department of Commerce, all in 5290. So Commerce has some things that they were required to set up, I think in addition to providing opportunity for a grant program to help jurisdictions implement this. But the bill is really aimed at increasing timeliness for
Timeliness and
permits.
speed, yes.
Yes, so that we can get multifamily housing projects issued, as well as other commercial projects issued and off the books.
I'm sure this is not true, but I think that, does the report require any measurement for the administrative burden of the legislation and the time it takes to, of course, no.
No.
I often say, the building on the hill is full of good information.
Yes.
Kathy?
So just logistics, I'm assuming we'll have multiple city staff that can do the same role. So heaven forbid somebody have an ill-timed knee surgery or something. And
Yeah.
you're the only one in the
Yeah.
department that does this and every permit is gonna, so I'm assuming if we don't, we're going to set up staff so that we have duplication and cover this or.
Right now, we have 3 current planners who review land use permits. We have a couple plan reviewers in the building department who do plan review, and then I think there are 3 or 4 on Tom's team who do civil permit review. I mean, it's lean. It's very lean.
But some
So
duplication at least and overlap or whatever, so.
there are people, yes, who can step in to do the jobs, but
Had other questions if you want to go around the room again before you come back to me.
Anybody else?
So just, do we anticipate any public comment of any degree on this, or is?
Absolutely not. Okay, I don't. I haven't received any concerns at this point.
The penalty is prescribed, that you said like 10%,
10%
so,
up to 20%.
and it's other than, you know, so we'd have to refund a customer if we didn't do that, any other ramifications for the city, so is if we have need time to get settled into this routine or get our flow, or, is there more
So-
repercussions beyond the giving somebody their money back?
So one of the things that is built into the legislation, there are these 10 items. And these 10 items are intended to, that a jurisdiction could adopt. They're intended to show that you're taking other steps to increase permit timeliness. And so the council would need to adopt at least 3 of them by resolution. And if they do that, then we avoid that penalty, that monetary penalty altogether until there's a certain point, I think it's 10 years after adoption of our comp plan, where we can look back, and if we're not meeting the timelines that we've adopted, we'd have to adopt additional means to increase permit timeliness, or then be subject to that, the monetary penalties. So there are some things by resolution that the city can do, and I think those are likely to come before the council, before the end of the year, to try and insulate the city from those monetary penalties.
Will we be voting on that as a planning commission, or do you guys take that directly to council?
I think that will go directly.
I
to
think it goes
council.
directly to council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
But we
policy
can,
thing.
as we move forward on that, if that's not the case, I'll make sure to let you guys know.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
no.
But we can also brief you on that too, as that moves forward. Cause I think we would like to, set this up for a public hearing in November, at the first planning commission meeting in November. And at that time, if we know a little bit more, we can provide that information as well.
Does that give us timing to get it to the council in time, or?
It should, yeah, I think so. So as long as we can get it by, that gets the first meeting in December.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure, no problem.
Good to see you again.
Yes, you too.
You are welcome to stay. We always enjoy an audience.
Probably will. And I do want to look into the 3670A items a little bit more deeply. They don't impact chapter 1, but we'll look a little bit more carefully, but I think so that I can speak to it a little bit more. Oh,
Great. Thank you, Sarah, very much.
thank
All
you
right.
guys.
Hello,
Let's roll.
all right. I believe it's the critical areas is next on the agenda. I have a couple things in front of you tonight, so.
This is the critical areas periodic update.
All right. I will share that presentation then. Let's see if we can go full screen here. Perfect. Yep, so we brought this to you guys, now it seems like a month or 2 ago. Yeah, I don't
It was
actually, I'm not sure exactly when that was, but that was kind of a brief introduction to our critical areas regulations. Since then, we've done, started to do an internal staff review and then also sent it out to Commerce. Really Commerce as a way or a method to distribute it out to all the different state agencies that review these documents, but also create a lot of the best available science that goes into them and is part of the update process. We've since received feedback from Commerce and all of those state agencies on the draft document. That feedback is in the packet, so that's one of the many pages that is attached to this report. Or some of the many pages.
There's just a couple.
Yeah.
Not read them all.
That said, I'm gonna run through kind of a quick summary of what's in there. Happy to answer questions. I'm not gonna go line by line. Otherwise, we might be here. Yeah.
Short.
You have a couple hundred pages less than I do, so. But yeah, high level, this is part of our 10-year rolling requirements from the Growth Management Act. Our critical areas ordinances, and there are multiple ones that kind of make up the critical areas ordinance, was last adopted in 2017. Then this next update cycle is we're targeting next year, so 2025 for when we'll have this adopted. And really the way that Lacey comes at this is looking for updates within the scientific community as far as best practices on how better to implement the same kind of goals of critical areas. So protecting environmental features or functions, whatever it might be. But that's really kind of at the core of each one of these chapters. Really what we're looking to do is based on best available science, how can we, you know, protect streams or lakes or wetlands or steep slopes or what have you. We do within Lacey have an adopted definition of best available science, which is that top one there. And then the Washington Administrative Code also provides some additional context on what best available science means. I did underline the repeatable methods because I am going to reference that later in one of the staff recommendations that we are going to be providing. And using that as kind of a primary justification on why we might not be implementing something that we may otherwise. But we'll get to that in a minute. Lead agencies and subject experts. So a reference that we send it to Commerce, and then Commerce sends it out to all the different lead agencies and subject experts. Department of Ecology, Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Department of Natural Resources really are those content experts. So when we're getting that feedback back and that the guidance that we've shared in the packet, that's who that guidance is coming from. They're also the ones that have all the scientists that do all the research and figure out what best available science is. So they provide recommendations and then also provide review. So they're kind of front load and then also review as well. So they're involved in this process really all the way through. Within the revised code of Washington, it highlights wetland areas, habitat conservation areas, flood hazard areas, aquifer recharge areas, and geologically sensitive areas as different types of critical areas. Within the Lacey Municipal Code, each one of those critical areas is addressed through those chapters. So within our code, if you're looking for anything on those subjects, this is generally where you're going to find it. It's not quite the same name convention in some of them, but it's pretty much a cross tab in that sense. So as far as proposed updates for this cycle, sorry, that text is actually too small. Did want to keep it on one page, but I will read it. Updated language and definitions to improve understanding and clarity, consistent with Washington Administrative Code. So this really just speaks to definitions. Over time, some definitions are kind of identified as being a little bit clunky, or there's a better way to speak to that thing. So that's really just streamlining our definitions so that they're a little bit more concise, a little bit more consistent. No functional real changes in that one there, just really for clarity. And then the next one is clarification of subdivision limitations adjacent to or containing wetlands and associated buffers. And really what this is that you can't subdivide a property that has a wetland on one side of it, then creating the opportunity to build having residential rights to build an additional home on that wetland side. So you can't divide your property in a way that creates two separate residential lots, one that's fully encumbered by a wetland that then you would then have rights to build residential units on. So it's really just strengthening that language there. We already did have criteria defining that, but it's just a little bit more in depth now. And then updated mitigation sequencing based on WDFW guidance. So they actually just changed the order of two of the criteria within the mitigation sequencing. Still all the same ones, and I think I have on the next page. So yeah, I'll talk to that in a second, or speak to that in a second. But it's just changing the last two, the order of them. And again, that's based on best available science. They found that one of those is more impactful than the other, so I can touch on that in a second. And then additional language to emphasize no net loss of ecological functions. Again, this is already something that was in there. They just wanted to kind of bolster that section of the critical areas ordinance. So they added additional language in there to really reinforce that no net loss. So when people are doing mitigation or there are impacts that are taking place, the end result needs to be one of no net environmental loss is really what that's getting at. Updating wetland mitigation ratios to align with mitigation sequencing. So I'm going to speak to that in a second, but that's again, these definitions here. So they expanded these definitions, so really we're just updating the mitigation ratios to match those expanded new definitions. But I can speak to that again in a second here. And then mitigation requirements following temporary emergency work around wetlands consistent with Department of Ecology guidance. So this one was ensuring that, so there is language within our chapters that allow for emergency work. So if something is like endangering somebody's house or home or property in some sense, and it needs to happen right away, there is language in there that allows for that to happen. But the follow-up is that there's still those mitigation requirements once the emergency has been addressed, that they still need to be met. So again, it's really, a lot of these are just strengthening the language within these sections. We did have language that spoke to that, but now it's just a little bit more robust and detailed as far as what that process looks like. And then updated references and text citations based on recent studies and best available science resources. So these chapters were last updated in 2017, and since then there's been quite a few different new studies that have replaced the ones that were previously referenced. So all of those references have been updated to kind of point to the latest science or resources that are out there. So it's just better resources for when folks are actually using these chapters, that they're actually linked to the most recent available information on those topics. Any questions on that so far? Okay, and then oh man, compensatory mitigation. I wanted to throw this one in there for two different reasons. So I referenced this earlier, but they switched 3 and 4 there. So enhancement used to be before preservation, and Department of Ecology recommends switching those. So we have still part of the process. Ideally, we don't get down to either of those, but when that does happen, there's a different order to how we review a project. And then also within our wetlands mitigation language, we only had 2 categories, which was essentially the avoidance or the restoration. But now by kind of looking at these additional categories, we've kind of expanded that to be a little bit more responsive or granular to each one of these categories instead of just 2 buckets that we're talking about. So there's more detail in there as far as depending on what mitigation tactic you're using, there's more specific requirements to that are tailored to that one versus 3 versus 4 kind of thing. So those are all of the kind of high level changes. All of that information is in your packet. There's also the track changes in there and the agency guidance on where and how and why to implement that differently than what we've done previously. Another one that was addressed or identified within the agency comments that we received was riparian management zones. They spoke about it quite a bit within the comments. I'm primarily bringing it up because we have that, but we just call it riparian habitat areas. So that when we're speaking about the comments that were related to riparian management zones, they're just addressed in a different chapter or section that's called riparian habitat areas. Within that section, we also have a table of riparian habitat area widths. And essentially this is the buffer that's associated with different types of streams that we have in the community. Type S streams are state designated. Type F streams are streams that have fish in them. And then type NP and NS streams are perennial and seasonal streams. And we have standard buffers that are assigned to each one of those. I wanted to call that out. Woodland Creek, by the way, is at that type F stream, so it has a 200-foot buffer. The reason I'm calling that out is that one of the other things that WDFW actually put forward as a new way to establish buffers for streams was to utilize what they call a site potential tree height. So instead of just using a standardized buffer, so for example, using the Woodland Creek as an example, it has instead of using a 200-foot buffer on either side of that stream, this would actually be based on the types of trees that are growing adjacent to that stream and then their standard height after 200 years. And they actually developed a mapping tool that is supposed to help both city staff implement that code, but also community members understand it. And using that tool, or just giving it a kind of a trial run to figure out how well that could actually translate to our community and the streams that we have within it. We found that it creates variable buffer widths even within a single property. So you might be 190 feet in one section and 300 in another. We also found that it's reliant on 1955 regional soil data that was created regionally and not site specific. So there's some broad assumptions that are taking place there that aren't necessarily representative of what's happening at the parcel level, which is where we operate. Overall, it would actually run the risk of lowering protections or buffers along Woodland Creek based on those variable distances. We have more accurate GIS data than the state does for local streams. So their map that they've developed to help utilize this is actually not as accurate as city resources. So it's not actually helpful in that sense. I talked about the variable buffers within individual parcels, and then implementation guidance was clunky, to say it kindly. So while we did receive a lot of recommendations and kind of ran through those that we are implementing, this is actually one that we aren't planning on carrying forward at this time. If a lot of these concerns that we have with that potential tool get resolved, maybe we can look at that in the future. But they also, in their guidance that they wrote to us, complimented us on our existing standards and said that they were doing a great job of what we hoped they would do. So our thought is not to change something that's working well.
Nine scariest words in the English language.
Yeah. This is a screenshot of it, and it's looking at Woodland, the map that I was talking about that they created. And yeah, I think it's based on, you know, in one section, looking at red alder, after 200 years, it's supposed to be 100 feet tall. So that would mean that in that section that there's a 100-foot buffer, but then right next door, it was like a 215-foot buffer. So from an implementation perspective and from being able to communicate with the community effectively and create, we just felt that it wasn't the best thing to implement within our code this time around. And then, yeah, we have next steps. So a quick summary of where we're at. Staff is reviewing existing code for consistency with best available science. We already sent the draft code based on that review to Commerce. Commerce provided review and guidance, which has been in your packet. We're also currently doing some internal department review. I'm actually not on the one that kind of day-to-day looks at these things. So I sent it over to our current planning staff to see if there's anything else in there that other ideas, feedback they may have. So far, it's really just that not using the tree methodology. We do have a public hearing right now scheduled for November 13th, I believe it is. And it's really just to hear any feedback from the community. If there is anything on that, we have the opportunity to make a recommendation at that time or do additional review after that. If we do have any questions, concerns, or other feedback that comes in that time. Yeah, from there, you guys would then at some point make a recommendation to council. Council would then conduct their review and then make their adoption. And I think that's my last slide on that one. So you guys have any questions on those topics?
Sorry.
Yeah, we'll start with Elliot.
How does this affect existing structures?
Yeah, so this primarily is future development. So anything that's already existing or in place today is operating under the code that was in place when that structure was constructed. If it were to be torn down and something new was to be put in that place at that time, then the new code or newly adopted code would apply, but not until then.
Okay, so if the person wanted to put an ADU, this would kick in, but if they have an existing home on the edge of a riparian
Correct.
stream, I see.
Yeah.
Nope.
Good. Daphne?
Just for clarity, and it's probably in those 327 pages and I just didn't see it. But like, so, and I totally agree, but where's the water line? So I'm on Woodland Creek, am I like a high water mark or where does my 200 feet start counting or where?
Yeah, so it actually depending on, and so we already do have some level of interpretation that does take place as part of the implementation of this code. But yeah, so it's either the high water line, typically if there's not really a defined bank edge. Otherwise, it's sometimes the bank edge, and then unless you're in what's considered a floodplain, and then it's kind of the outer edge of whatever that floodplain is. So it is a bit of a moving target depending on what characteristics physically exist on the ground. But at least then whenever that edge is defined, it's just a known 200 feet. It's not then also based on whatever trees might be growing around you.
Yeah, I think I could,
And I think
200 feet by, measuring.
It's something that I think that we can communicate rather effectively, and it's understandable, and it actually in many cases provides equal to or more than protections of what they're trying to implement, so.
and I think a legal term is median high water,
Mhm.
right?
Or ordinary?
Ordinary high water, yeah.
Ordinary harbor.
They're actually
County uses median.
two different terms, but yeah, so they speak to very similar things.
Right.
But yeah, so it is depending on the site characteristics that are wherever you're measuring from. There's a couple different edges that we would be looking for. But yeah, yeah, they're typically very close together, and it's more than 200 feet that we're paying attention to than where, yeah.
Spencer, anything?
No.
Okay,
Buddy.
yeah,
Okay.
all right, so so you said 1955. My understanding is the last Thurston County Soil Survey was done in 1985 or 90?
In some areas.
Okay,
And the big takeaway is that there are relying on the soil survey is difficult at best because it is kind of a scatter shot that was done.
well, it's kind of mushy boundaries.
Yeah,
Yes.
so when you're trying to put hard code to mushy boundaries, it creates a lot of area for interpretation and variable results. So we can't really consistently, like, if I were to interpret something and review an application and then Sarah might get it, we might get to two different results based on that. So, and that's really, we want to be as consistent as possible when we're reviewing things, so. That's kind of our concern with that one, is that it doesn't really give us a pathway forward that we can consistently apply code and communicate that to the community.
That makes sense.
So that's.
Okay. Anybody have any additional?
Okay,
Awesome, we're done with that one, so outreach.
yeah, so that's me again. And I will share my other presentation. And I think this one actually should look rather familiar. I'm not gonna share all the slides, but I just wanted to use it to highlight a couple things. Full screen, maybe, possibly. There we go. I'm gonna hop back to this graphic, which I think is one that you've all seen before. But it's helpful just to reference back. So this is kind of our very simplified comprehensive plan timeline, if you will, and all the different phases of it. Right now, we're in phase one, which is the visioning, which is really just kind of broad scale outreach as much as possible, just trying to ask open-ended questions, engage as many community members, inform them about what the comprehensive plan is, what it can do, and then getting their feedback based on that kind of initial explanation of what it is and how it's utilized within the operations of the city. As part of this phase one visioning, we conducted a couple different workshops, one of which we did with you guys, which was that Mentimeter where you guys got to kind of vote and share your thoughts on different things. We also took that to city council and the youth council. So we did all of that, got all that feedback. We also did a couple local tabling events. We attended the barbecue festival, we attended Cops, Cars and Kids. And we also just last week attended Children's Day. And again, these are just kind of community events that draw generally Lacey crowds, which is helpful in trying to just meet people where they're already at, not create additional events that they would then have to physically attend. And using these really primarily as kind of awareness opportunities, trying to tell people that this process is going on, and then encourage them to be participants in it, and then also provide feedback via a survey that we've actually now launched that I'll share with you guys in a second here. And I think this is I gave this presentation to you guys and council, so apologies if some of this is new or familiar. But yeah, Barbecue Fest, we connected with 68 different individuals that kind of came to our booth and chatted with us in some way or another, some of which chose to also provide some feedback. So questions that we asked at that one were really, what's your vision for Lacey's future? Common themes within those, that feedback had to do with sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes, so kind of multimodal transportation was kind of the bucket that a lot of that falls into. We also heard a lot about pool and splash/spray parks. I think that's gonna be a common theme that we're gonna hear throughout. We hear about that one even when we're not asking about park related topics or comprehensive plan related. Anytime that's gonna typically show up. So that's one of the usual suspects.
Everybody wants a pool, no one wants to pay for it.
That's right.
Yeah, so,
Olympia has one.
I mean, no. Yeah, so, and then affordable housing, that was another one that showed up. It was a common theme. And then healthcare, hospitals, and mental health was another one. And these are kind of broad buckets, so there's a lot of individual comments that kind of occupy those categories. At Cops, Cars, and Kids, we asked similar questions. We heard some similar overlapping themes and then a couple new ones. So the increased connectivity is really kind of still within that multimodal kind of pathways, sidewalks, crosswalks, bike lanes, all kind of working together, create kind of a city network is kind of that theme or how I would describe it. Interactive parks and splash pads. So again, we heard about that one. Trees and natural settings. So this has not quite park specific, but more trees and plants and kind of more passive open spaces kind of in that category. And then affordable home ownership and housing options. So there's some common themes there. And then Children's Day, we had 87 additional folks that talked with or spoke with us while we were at that event. Common themes again, trees, plants, community gardens, environmental protections. So we actually, that's another common theme that we're hearing a good amount about, and I anticipate that that'll get carried forward within the comprehensive plan as one of those priority areas that we really do spend some time with. Year-round recreations was another one. We've heard about that kind of at lower levels, but it really kind of was one of the more prominent topics that folks were talking about us at this event. And really kind of what that meant is it rains here a lot, and having opportunities to do active, kind of fun, engaging recreational activities indoors or in a covered capacity when it's kind of crummy out. Also Disneyland, there was a request for that. Sorry, I think it was actually Disney World, so I didn't miswrite that one, but yeah, that's on there as well. And then housing options, lower rents, lower taxes, housing for lower income, ADUs, those were also common themes that we heard about. And then community and family oriented activities, and there was some overlap with that one in the kind of year-round recreation. But yeah, I think. Yeah, and then as far as upcoming events, there's Winterfest, which is currently scheduled for November 2nd, which we're planning on attending. That's another just local community event that tends to draw a pretty decent community audience. So we'll plan to have a presence there and do some of the same exercise. So we asked those questions, but we're also pointing people to resources and future ways to engage, trying to get their contact information. We do now have that survey that I will show you in a second. So we're pointing people towards that as kind of the next step on how to provide feedback and engage within the process. And then looking towards next year, there's the Lacey Cultural Celebration, typically in spring of 2025 that we'll plan to be at that one. And then we'll also plan to kind of early 2025 host a open house workshop of kind of all of the feedback, all of the findings that we've heard up till that point. And that'll likely be in this room here. So that's our plan for kind of into spring of 2025 as far as community engagement. And with that, I'm actually gonna pivot over to, if I can find it, Stop sharing for a second. The screen. Yep. I actually want to start on our city website really quick. So we do have a survey that's now live that is asking a lot more in-depth questions, trying to solicit as much community feedback as possible. It's actually linked right there at the top of our homepage, so it's readily available and findable. We're pushing out through our social media, different communication channels that we have. We're gonna have something in Lacey Life and Thurston Talks, and we also have a lot of different email chain distribution groups that we're also gonna be sending out to all of our different HOAs, things like that. Just try to get as many eyes on it and as much participation as possible. By clicking on that link, it takes you over to
Are you,
this survey.
just for clarification, are you doing any kind of an announcement in utility bills?
Yep, so we're really just kind of all hands on deck, kind of any communication channel that we have, we're gonna use it to get the word out. And so that link, this is actually the editing view. I've clicked in there too many times, so it's tracking my information and won't let me provide more feedback on it. So this is the way that I get to show it to you without getting kicked out. So this is kind of the opening screen. Just kind of is a welcome, gives a very high overview of what we're trying to hear from the community. You can click on that button, it gives you an explanation of what a comprehensive plan is and why it's important and why we're doing this. It's also gonna be available in Spanish and Vietnamese, which are the two next most spoken languages within the community after English. It has some visioning questions that were very similar to the ones that you guys got, the ones that we took to council and youth council as well. And then there's also the cool thing about this platform is that there's some mapping exercises. So while there's your traditional kind of multiple choice or fill in the blank style questions, there's also some mapping related ones where you can actually drop pins on a map and then provide specific information about those locations. So what's nice about that is that it actually takes a lot of the guesswork out of interpreting comments or feedback that either we've had in person or that we receive in kind of open-ended boxes. So we can actually, and there's housing related questions in there, there's work and economic development related questions in there, there's transportation related questions in there, all of which have some level of mapping component to them, which allows people to be very specific and targeted in their feedback. And it actually cuts down a lot of staff time as far as trying to read for intent and meaning and whether or not it's something specific or just more of a general comment. So cool feature there. And then it also, this is, yeah, just the first page and I'll skip ahead. But we do ask some demographic and locational questions as well, which is also helpful as we're moving through this, that we can check in on how we're doing. And if there are gaps of the community that we're not really hearing from or demographics or things like that, we can kind of check how well we're reaching those different communities and then increase our efforts to hear more from that part of the community or that demographic or what have you, to make sure that we're really getting as representative of a response rate as we can. So yeah, and I think that's really kind of all I have on that one. We're planning on running this till close to the end of the year. We'll kind of, once we do our big kind of initial blitz of trying to get it out, we'll track how many people are visiting on a daily basis and then kind of make a decision based on when we shut down the survey based on how much traffic we're getting.
Cool.
And we'll probably do a couple more kind of rounds of kind of sharing of the survey and making sure that we get as many responses as possible. But yeah.
Please go backwards, Daphne.
I don't have anything this time.
Yep. Elliot? Spencer, your hand's not up, so unless you pipe in, I'm gonna assume you have nothing. My question is, so you had mentioned when you were going through number of respondents at each festival.
Yep.
When you got the kids, we got 87 additional comment. You're not keeping track. I mean, you could have gotten one person at all three events making
Yeah.
Probably the same comment.
Yeah, so when we attend events, our objectives there are twofold. One is definitely to get feedback and get guidance from the community, but it's also an awareness and education opportunity. And it's an opportunity to have more one-on-one conversations with staff and community members, which is not something that a survey provides. So it's a way to kind of meet people where they are in that sense without trying to make it as reducing this. One of the things that we heard from you guys and council and Peace Council is really trying to reduce the number of barriers that it takes for the community to participate and provide feedback. So we heard that that should be accomplished through both in-person and virtual or online formats. So yeah, the in-person ones, there is a scenario of kind of hearing from those same 10 people or what have you. The online, it does track your IP address. So if you were to start the survey and then come back to it, it would actually repopulate with all the information you've already provided. So it's kind of a long survey, so it's nice that you can do it in chunks. I'll be fair about that from the beginning. But also, yeah, if you're all about dog parks and you really want to make sure that they happen, you can't really tip the scales that much to dog parks or whatever your individual cause might be that you really want to make sure happens.
You know, and that's the way we did it 10 years ago. I remember being at the military day at Cabela's when we had our booth there.
Mhm.
This young woman came around.
She changed outfits?
No, she,
No?
it's the same feedback every time. I remember saying, you know, I mean, this is the same 3 things, right? Are we counting all of that? And I don't remember which staffer was with me at that booth. And they said, yeah, this person thinks it's really important that we know that. So yes, we're counting it.
Yeah.
So it made sense.
Yeah, and we're familiar with that. There's definitely always gonna be some degree of that. We also see it in online surveys where somebody or multiple different people might have the same comment and you
Right.
kind of read that, okay, they probably all know each other or,
Copy and paste.
yeah,
Yeah.
something like that.
Within
So,
the same neighborhood.
so I mean, but participation is participation. So I mean, our biggest goal is to make sure that we're hearing from the community. So if we get some duplication or one person that's really going after their subject, I think that that's still a win at the end of the day. It means that they're participating.
It's not a
Absolutely.
vote. We're not like voting, okay, so now we've had 6 votes for spray
Right,
bars, and
right.
so,
Right.
you know, so.
It's all information.
Okay.
No.
Well, it sounds like you guys are doing a good job. Thank you so much for the update. Our next meeting is October 23rd in 2 weeks. So I look forward to seeing you all then. Spencer, I hope you feel better soon. Thanks for
Spencer,
hanging in there
get
with us
better.
tonight.
Sounds
And I'm gonna
better.
call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Poor Spencer, sounds like he's dying on you.
Didn't want to.
Jeff, I will not be here on November 13th, and you guys got that public hearing, so hopefully you'll have a quorum and